Medieval battles were absolute chaos. Thousands of men in identical metal suits swinging swords in mud and blood. So here's what doesn't make sense. Friendly fire was shockingly rare. How did knights instantly recognize enemies in that madness? The answer involves something you've probably never even noticed in paintings. Picture a battlefield in the 13th century. 10,000 men. Everyone's wearing metal. Everyone's screaming. Mud everywhere. Dust clouds so thick you can barely see your own hands. And here's the problem nobody talks about. By the 1200s, helmets had evolved to cover the entire face. We're talking full metal buckets with tiny eye slits. Your own brother could be standing 3 feet away and you'd have no clue. He'd just be another steel-covered stranger trying not to die. Now chainmail, basically identical across all of Europe. Same interlocking rings, same silvery gray color, same weight. A French knight and an English knight looked like twins from 20 yards out. Actually, they looked like twins from 5 yards out. Makes identification kind of important, right? Well, here's where it gets messy. There was no central army supply back then. No quartermaster handing out matching uniforms. Every single knight assembled his own gear, bought his own armor, chose his own equipment. So you've got thousands of men who all decided independently to dress exactly the same. It's like showing up to a party where everyone accidentally wore the same outfit. Except at this party, people are swinging axes. Friendly fire wasn't just common, it was devastating. Some battles saw 20 to 30% of casualties from allies killing each other. The Battle of Barnet in 1471, one English faction literally attacked another English faction because they mistook a badge in the chaos. They lost the battle partly because they kept murdering their own side. So medieval commanders faced an impossible puzzle. How do you tell friend from foe when everyone looks identical and faces are hidden behind metal? The solution they invented was brilliant, and it started with something surprisingly simple: paint. Paint changed everything. Around 1100, knights started slapping bright colors onto their shields, not randomly, strategically. They picked bold combinations that screamed, "Look at me," from across a muddy field. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't just medieval arts and crafts, it became an entire legal system called heraldry, and the rules were surprisingly strict. You couldn't just pick any colors you wanted. There were only 2 categories: metals, gold and silver, and colors: red, blue, green, black, purple. And here's the rule that made it work. You had to put metal on color, or color on metal. Never metal on metal. Never color on color. Why? Contrast. A gold lion on a red background pops from 50 yards away. Gold on silver looks like a smudge. Medieval designers figured out visibility science centuries before anyone called it that. Now every knight's coat of arms was unique. Like a license plate, except fancier and with more lions. You registered it. You protected it legally. If someone copied your design, you could literally sue them in a special court called the Court of Chivalry. I'm not kidding. Medieval knights had intellectual property lawyers. And then there were heralds. These guys were the human databases of their era. Professional specialists who memorized thousands of coat of arms. Think of them like sports commentators who can name every player's stats from the past 20 seasons. Except instead of batting averages, they knew whose grandfather married whose cousin and what that meant for their shield design. The system spread across Europe within decades. France, England, Germany, Spain. Everyone adopted it because everyone faced the same problem. But shields had a fatal flaw. One that forced knights to get creative with their wardrobes. Shields weren't just protection, they were basically medieval LinkedIn profiles. See, a knight's shield didn't just say, "I'm Sir Whatever." It told your entire family history through a system called quartering. Every marriage, every inheritance, every powerful ancestor got crammed onto one wooden board. Your great-grandmother married into royalty? That goes on the shield. Your grandfather conquered some territory? Add it. 3 generations of strategic marriages? Now you've got a shield that looks like a patchwork quilt designed by someone having a fever dream. But here's where it gets awkward. Birth order mattered. A lot. The oldest son inherited dad's exact coat of arms. Clean, simple, powerful. Younger sons? They got the same design, but with small marks called cadency added to show they weren't first in line. Basically a medieval participation trophy painted right onto your identity. And then there's the bend sinister. A diagonal bar across the shield that screamed one thing to everyone who saw it: illegitimate birth. Your parents weren't married? Congratulations, you're wearing that shame into every battle, every tournament, every social gathering for life. Brutal, right? Now, these shields took serious abuse. Wood cracked, paint chipped. One good sword strike and half your family tree looked like abstract art. Knights repainted them constantly, sometimes between battles. Some wealthy families employed dedicated painters who traveled with the army specifically to touch up heraldry. Losing your shield? Absolute disaster. Captured shields got hung upside down in churches as trophies, the ultimate public humiliation. Your enemies could literally walk past your family crest every Sunday, dangling in disgrace. But shields had one massive problem nobody talks about. When you're fighting, your shield faces forward, toward your enemy, which means the people behind you, your own allies, saw nothing but your back. So your shield shows who you are. Great, but shields face forward, toward the enemy. Your allies, they're staring at your back, and your back looks exactly like everyone else's back. Just metal and leather and confusion. This was a genuine problem. Knights kept dying because the guy behind them couldn't tell friend from foe. Imagine surviving an enemy charge only to get stabbed by your own cousin who thought you were French. Enter the surcoat. Around 1210, someone brilliant realized, why not turn your entire body into a billboard? A surcoat was basically a long cloth tunic worn over your armor, and it displayed your heraldry across your chest, your back, even your sides. Suddenly, identification worked from every angle. The term coat of arms literally comes from these coats. We still use the phrase today, 800 years after the garment itself became obsolete. That's some serious staying power. But surcoats weren't just medieval name tags. During the Crusades, they served another purpose entirely. Metal armor in Middle Eastern sun, that's basically wearing an oven. The cloth layer prevented knights from slowly cooking inside their own gear. Form meets function. Wealthy knights owned multiple surcoats because these things got destroyed constantly. Blood, mud, sword slashes. One battle and your fancy heraldry looked like modern art. Some knights changed surcoats mid-battle when the first one became unrecognizable. By 1300, the fashion spread to horses. Entire animals draped in matching heraldic cloth, creating massive moving banners that could be spotted from hundreds of yards away. Now you've got identification covered visually. But here's the thing about medieval battlefields. Sometimes you couldn't see anything at all. Dust, rain, darkness. And when your eyes failed completely, knights had to rely on something far more primitive: their voices. The French screamed, Montjoie Saint-Denis, when they charged. English knights bellowed, St. George, at the top of their lungs. Get that cry wrong, your own side would cut you down before you finished the sentence. Every noble house maintained its own unique battle cry. These weren't random shouts. They were audio passwords passed down through generations, practiced until they became muscle memory. And here's the clever part. Passwords changed constantly during longer campaigns. Why? Because enemies listened. They learned. One captured soldier spilling tomorrow's phrase could doom an entire force. At the Siege of Orleans in 1429, French troops used Jesus Maria as their daily password. Simple enough for exhausted soldiers to remember. But try faking that with an English accent. Didn't work so well. Night attacks were absolute nightmares. The Battle of Towton in 1461 happened during a snowstorm. Men literally identified friends by feeling their armor, recognizing voices, sometimes just grabbing someone and hoping they grabbed right. I genuinely cannot imagine the stress. Some commanders got creative with sound. Specific trumpet calls meant specific things. 3 short blasts, rally to your lord. 1 long note, enemy cavalry approaching from the left. It was like having a medieval radio system, except your radio was a guy with really good lungs. Wrong trumpet pattern, and suddenly half your army charges the wrong direction. Makes you appreciate walkie-talkies, doesn't it? But sound had obvious limits. Battles are loud. Thousands of men screaming, metal crashing, horses dying. Even the best war cry gets swallowed by chaos. So knights needed something bigger, something visible from across an entire battlefield, something that could anchor thousands of soldiers to a single point. They needed flags, banners, the original GPS system. Every lord worth his salt carried a personal banner into battle, not for decoration, for survival. That flag told hundreds of soldiers exactly where to go, who to protect, and when to panic. And here's the thing. If your lord's banner fell, you assumed he was dead. Morale collapsed instantly. Men who'd been fighting like demons suddenly became headless chickens. Banner bearers knew this. So did the enemy. Want to cause maximum chaos with minimum effort? Forget killing 10 random soldiers. Kill the guy holding the flag. One arrow, one sword thrust, and suddenly 300 men don't know where they belong anymore. Pretty efficient warfare, honestly. The English got clever with this. At certain battles, they planted fake banners to draw enemy charges into prepared ambush positions. French cavalry would see a royal standard, think, there's the prize, and charge straight into a wall of longbowmen. Oops. Royal standards received special treatment. Specific knights were assigned as permanent banner guards. Their job? Die before letting that flag touch the ground. Not try really hard to protect it. Die. Non-negotiable. But here's my favorite example. King John of Bohemia at the Battle of Crécy in 1346. The man was completely blind. Couldn't see a thing. Did that stop him? Absolutely not. He had his knights tie their horses to his mount. They rode together, fighting around his banner as a single unit. He died in that battle, but his standard never fell while he lived. That's commitment. Banners work beautifully for organization. But medieval warfare wasn't just about killing. Sometimes keeping enemies alive was far more profitable. Literally profitable. We're talking retirement fund levels of money. Let's talk money. Because medieval warfare had a financial system that would make Wall Street jealous. Here's the thing about knights killing other knights. They usually didn't want to. A dead knight gave you nothing but a corpse and maybe some dented armor. A living knight? That was a walking lottery ticket. Ransoms were absolutely insane. We're talking 10 to 20 years of income for capturing the right person. One good capture could fund your family for 3 generations. Your great-grandchildren could be living off that money. King Richard I of England got captured during the Crusades. His ransom? 150,000 marks. That's roughly 35 tons of silver. England had to create a special tax just to pay it off. Every citizen contributed. The whole country went broke, saving one guy. So knights developed rules: remove your helmet, drop to your knees, and you've officially surrendered. The victor had to accept, legally required, no exceptions. Kill a surrendered knight? That wasn't warfare anymore. That was murder. You could face execution, permanent disgrace, your family name ruined forever. And here's where it gets weird. Battlefields turned into bizarre shopping sprees. Knights actively hunted for valuable targets instead of just fighting. They'd check heraldry mid-combat. Is this guy worth capturing, or should I just kill him? Pretty dark calculation, honestly. Common soldiers? No such protection. They couldn't afford ransoms worth collecting. Different rules entirely. But this created a problem. How do you identify which knight is worth a fortune? You needed to recognize people before you tried capturing them. Luckily, medieval society had built-in networking events. Tournaments weren't just entertainment. They were business conferences with swords. Tournaments served as medieval networking events. Think LinkedIn, but with lances. The same 500 to 1,000 knights appeared repeatedly at major tournaments across Europe, year after year. Same faces, same families, same rivalries. These guys knew each other. They'd trained together as squires, shared meals, gotten drunk at the same feasts, probably dated the same women. By the time they became full knights, half the people they'd fight had been childhood acquaintances. I think about my high school reunions. You recognize everyone, even 20 years later. Same concept, but with swords. Here's where it gets interesting. Knights developed signature fighting styles that became as recognizable as their faces. A particular way of gripping a sword, an unusual shield angle, the way someone shifted weight before attacking. You could identify opponents by how they moved. At the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, French and English knights reportedly greeted each other by name before charging. Actual names. Hello, Jean. Then they tried killing each other. Warfare was weirdly polite, and marriage alliances made everything complicated. You might face your wife's brother across the battlefield, your cousin, your former squire training partner. These weren't strangers. They were people you'd shared Christmas dinner with. This created strange battlefield dynamics. Some knights deliberately avoided certain opponents. Others specifically sought out personal rivals, grudges from tournaments carried over into actual wars. The medieval knight class was tiny, maybe a few thousand across all of Europe. Everyone knew everyone's business. Gossip traveled faster than horses, but personal recognition only worked when you actually knew your enemy. What about the thousands of soldiers who weren't knights? Completely different rules applied, and they weren't pretty. Here's the ugly truth nobody talks about. Knights played by gentlemen's rules, fancy ransoms, polite surrenders, professional courtesy between professionals. Common soldiers? They got slaughtered like livestock. A peasant infantry soldier couldn't pay ransom, couldn't offer anything valuable, couldn't provide useful political leverage. Capturing one meant feeding him, guarding him, transporting him. Pure loss. So they just killed them. No identification needed. No heraldry to check. If you weren't obviously a knight, you weren't worth keeping alive. Simple economics. Brutal economics. These foot soldiers wore no coats of arms, no fancy surcoats, often no real uniforms at all. They were identified by one simple criterion. Is this person clearly nobility? No? Dead. This created two completely separate wars happening simultaneously. Knights fighting knights with rules, honor, and financial incentives to show mercy, and everyone else dying in anonymous masses. I find this genuinely disturbing. Same battlefield, same cause, completely different survival odds based purely on birth. The Swiss pikemen eventually figured out how to exploit this system. They refused to play nice. Captured a knight, executed him, no ransom, no negotiation, just death. This terrified European nobility. The rules weren't supposed to work both ways. At Agincourt in 1415, something even darker happened. The English captured thousands of French knights during the battle. Valuable prisoners, future ransoms, walking fortunes. Then Henry V ordered them killed anyway. Why? He couldn't spare soldiers to guard them during the fighting, so thousands of noble prisoners were executed on the spot. Common soldiers developed their own identification tricks, colored ribbons, specific hat styles, regional weapons that marked where you came from. But even the best systems eventually broke down completely. And when they failed, absolute chaos. So what happened when this whole system collapsed? Absolute carnage. The Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403 was a nightmare scenario. Both sides were English, same kingdom, same heraldry, same everything. Rebels fought loyalists, and everyone wore identical colors. Knights literally couldn't tell friend from enemy. They just started swinging at anyone nearby. The friendly fire casualties were catastrophic. Rain made things even worse. Water turned those carefully painted surcoats into muddy brown blobs. Shield paint ran and smeared. That beautiful heraldry system? Useless in a downpour. I've seen historical reenactments in light rain. Even with modern dyes, everything looks the same shade of soggy disappointment within minutes. Medieval paint technology was basically colored mud mixed with egg. One good storm and your identity literally washed away. But here's where it gets really interesting. Clever commanders figured out they could weaponize this confusion. They deliberately dressed their troops in enemy colors. Sneak attacks, surprise flanking maneuvers, complete battlefield chaos orchestrated on purpose. The French Jacquerie uprising of 1358 created pure terror among nobles. Peasant rebels captured knight armor and heraldry, then wore it. Suddenly, French nobles couldn't trust anyone in fancy gear. That knight riding toward you might be your cousin, might be an angry farmer who murdered your cousin and took his stuff. The psychological damage was immense. After particularly bloody battles, heralds from both armies would walk the corpse-strewn fields together. Their job? Identifying bodies by whatever remained of their coat of arms. Grim work, necessary work. By 1500, everything changed anyway. Gunpowder, mass infantry armies, thousands of anonymous soldiers with identical muskets. Individual knight identification became pointless. The system didn't fail because it was flawed. It failed because warfare itself evolved beyond recognition.